Hello, dear colleagues, dear clients. I'm Denis Sokolov from Moscow, and today we are going to have our IQ interview with Andrew Phipps. Andrew Phipps is our head of EMEA Research and Global Futurist. So, Andrew, hello.
Hello, Dennis. It's very good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Andrew. What does it mean, Global Futurist?
Start with the easy question first, I guess. So I think when we came into this year, there was a lot of thought around what's next, and not only what's next for this year or next year, but really there was a need for the business to try and understand a lot of the bigger macro trends and what they might mean in terms of real estate. So I think we perhaps, as researchers, certainly personally, can be very guilty of looking at real estate as an entity in itself, and we don't necessarily look at all the different elements that impact it. So I'm really passionate about understanding how behavior changes, how society changes, political, economic, all those different elements, and what they mean for real estate. So that's that's the sort of things that hopefully I'll be looking at this year. Obviously, the current situation's taken us in a slightly different direction. So trying to explain the future now is a bit more of a challenge than it was, but that's definitely the aspiration.
Well, that's very interesting exercise, though. So, and I would like to talk to you about this wider angle, because I know that you have very good and global vision. But let's start with yourself. I know that you joined Cushman Wakefield not long ago, and after a series of challenges with research in Cushman Wakefield, so now you're ruling EMEA team. So, can you say a few words about your background?
Absolutely. So I think my background's fairly varied, and that's not necessarily intentionally. It's just because of the opportunities that have risen above that, I guess. So my first role that was relevant was in consulting. So I spent 10 years as a consultant working for a boutique consultancy, mainly focused on operators in the oil and gas industry and retail operations and major manufacturers. And the great thing about that was being paid to fly around the world, stay in nice hotels, sit in nice seats on the aeroplane, and it was absolutely fabulous. So I got to work in 40 or 50 countries. Unfortunately, not in Russia, but I did get to work in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, so a few markets that are relatively close by. And I think there came a point as a consultant that you're starting to gain more from the clients than you're giving them yourself. And I think it's two sorts of people. One person either stays as a consultant forever, or I think after 8 or 9 years, you think about, I need to go back into the real world and learn more things to then be able to share those things. So I left the consultancy to work for a German research company called GfK. And they are heavily focused on non-food research. So primary clients were the likes of Samsung, Panasonic, Microsoft, etc. Really trying to help them understand the consumer, the customer, and a lot of work around the customer journey. So I sort of finished there as global head of digital, which was, again, great opportunity to travel around, understand what was happening, certainly in the earlier part of the e-commerce revolution that I guess we're seeing a big explosion in right now. Then I had, as we often do, a phone call asking if I wanted to go and talk to, I should whisper this, but CBRE. So I went to talk to CBRE and had a discussion with them about a sort of joint consulting research role, and worked there for 3 or 4 years. And that was interesting. It's a very big company, very sort of corporate in its approach. So that was okay. And then I thought I had enough knowledge to do a little bit of consulting. So I did that again by myself and a couple of colleagues for a year and a half. But then had another phone call from Cushman Wakefield. So somebody was potentially moving on, and I was going to go in there as a temporary discussion, just to try and look at the research team and see how that might work. And I guess I think sometimes you just find a home that really fits. And whether this is good or bad for Cushman Wakefield, it just feels like a really natural home. I just really like the people there. I think you're one of the first people I spoke to. Just the passion, integrity, and knowledge that the individuals have. It's just great, really is. And I think the only thing that we were lacking really was a little bit around process and trying to share some of the best practice we have, which is always a challenge. So started last May working on that, and then sort of, as you said, grown to include sort of marketing now, so marketing and research, and just pulling us all together. We have some really, really talented, excellent people, and I think the last few months have shown that there's such a demand and a value seen behind the research from all parts of the globe, whether it's a webinar talking about Tashkent, or it's a webinar today talking about industrial and logistics in Europe. There's always somebody who wants to have a discussion about what's happening. And I think we're lucky that we have the data to hand, but I think even luckier that we have the people that can interpret the data. Data's great, but without interpretation and explanation, it's just numbers. That's why I like Cushman, I think.
It's boring, really, without explanation and without
it
narrative.
is.
Yeah,
it is.
That's right. So now I want you to put on your global futurist shoes and let's talk about what is happening, basically. So what is happening on the market? Everyone wants to know.
Yeah, it is absolutely extraordinary. So we're in the UK. We are now in, I think it's day 103 of lockdown. Although things have eased a little bit, so one of my children's back at school 2 days a week, but then they break up for their summer holidays in a week's time, which is pretty much what they've been doing for the last 3 months. Shops are starting to open up again, and we're starting to slowly see the economy growing. But the amazing scale of change from January. So January the 1st, OECD's forecast for the year was 3.3% GDP growth. In April, that was changed to 3% GDP decline. In June, 4.6% GDP decline. So just a massive changes we're seeing because of this virus. And I think the interesting thing is it's been very much, started off being very much supply driven. So we had the huge issues with no stock, no supply, no products coming out of major manufacturing hubs around sort of China in particular. And then when they got to a stage where their supply capacity was improved and they could start to supply and ship again, we then have a huge decrease in demand. So America, Europe, Africa, there's just a lack of demand right now. So I guess the geographical movement of the virus has been really interesting from an academic point of view, not necessarily from a personal point of view. And I think there are lots of questions around how similar this is to previous recessions, previous downturns. And like all of them, I do believe that this time it is a little bit different. I think last time round, we had major issues with lots of finance companies. We had major issues with how loans were given out. So 105% mortgages, or no deposit required. So a huge capacity for people, companies, businesses that didn't have enough liquidity to be able to buy assets up quite quickly. And as a result, once that came tumbling down, there was a large degree of oversupply in the market. Assets were overpriced based on a view that everything will continue to increase. Whereas this time round, the financial institutions, governments, banks have been incredibly strong at supporting different countries, in supporting in terms of employment, in terms of furloughs, in terms of just billions and billions of dollars being put into the economy to try and stop things falling off a cliff, which I think is incredibly important. And the fact is we don't have oversupply, and assets in general aren't overpriced. I think a lot of the change potentially in real estate will come from a change in how we behave. So there's a sort of truism that it takes 66 days for a habit to form. So if we decide to run 5 kilometers every morning, after 66 days, we're just used to it as part of our lives, like we've never stopped. It's like stopping smoking. If you can stop for 2 months, you're pretty much free and easy. And I think most countries have been in a situation where a lot of individuals have worked from home, haven't been in an office environment, and that's their normal now. So I do think there is a very high level discussion taking place in all global companies about what do they need from their offices, where should they be, what role do they play, and how do they integrate the offices with a more remote and agile working environment. And I think that's it's a huge topic that'll go on for the next couple of years, I'm sure, but it will absolutely drive change. It's not necessarily to say we'll suddenly see less office space required, because I don't believe that. I think it's really about how the space is used and the purpose of it. So if you and I can be as effective working from home, whether you're creating some amazing Power BI dashboard integrated with some incredible online video platform, whatever, or I'm writing a simple report, there's no difference in whether I'm at home or sat in the office, apart from the fact it's a 2-hour commute. So why would I want to do that? But I think for collaborating, for meeting people, for spending time with them, that's where the value is. So you and I could get far more resolved in 2 hours sat face to face in a room with some good coffee than we could over 50 emails or 20 phone calls. That's what offices are about, I think, is about that collaboration, innovative way of thinking, and that's how we need to, I guess, reimagine what the office is for.
That's interesting. You started with describing your career as a frequent traveler. So you worked in 50 countries, and that actually allowed you to gain a huge experience. Is there any risks then researchers or analysts or consultants who will be starting this in post-pandemic era? Is there any risk that they will not have this opportunity? They will have to do all naturally desk studies only. What do you think
really
about
interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of that. And I really think being a consultant, taking a project where I was going to be away from home for sort of 3 months, really kick-started my career, really, and really got me noticed, got me to talk to the senior management, and that absolutely really was important. So that is a concern, and I think there certainly will be a lot less appetite for business travel, and I do think there will be some restrictions around people traveling a lot. So that is a very good point, that people potentially won't have the chance to experience that in quite the same way that I did. And that'd be a shame. But what I do think will happen, I hope it will happen at least, is that because it doesn't necessarily matter as much where people are working from, that we do have the chance that people move around a lot more. So there's no reason why you shouldn't come and work in London for 2 years, or somebody else goes to work in Paris or Milan or whatever. I think that opportunity becomes more, because we've demonstrated we can be incredibly effective wherever we are. We don't have to be literally sitting in the middle of the area that we are researchers on. We don't need to do that anymore.
It's interesting. I wonder how governments will react to that from the taxation point of view. If you can do work from any point and work in the corporation which is located somewhere else, so you will be using resources in other countries, so it will require probably significant shifts. When I talk to businesses, I often hear the 2 points of view, radical points of view. Some people say that the world of real estate is never going to be the same, and other people say no, it's going to be absolutely the same 2 years after pandemic, and lockdown will be over and we all return back to normal. So what do you think? World is never going to be the same, or world is always the same?
So I'll answer first, but then I do want your answer as well. And 100% and I can speak to 4 people in the wider team. 2 will say one and 2 will say the other. And because there's lots of examples of where things that we thought would have a major global change haven't actually changed things that much. That they at the time, whether it's a major terrorist attack or a war or a previous pandemic or a huge recession that we saw. That's the challenge, where sometimes you look back and think, well, actually nothing ultimately has changed. Generally, the world is still on a growth trajectory. Generally, stock markets are still doing very well. Generally, wealth is increasing. Poverty overall is decreasing. So in terms of the factual position. But I do think this time, I think people have recognized for themselves that the opportunity to work differently is something that they want. So I think I've struggled to find any survey results or any quotes from leaders of businesses that talk about, we want to go back to the office and for things to be exactly as they were before. All people are saying, we recognize now there's an opportunity for people to work remotely more often. And there may only be 1 or 2 days a week, but we're not saying every day. And I think it's that hybrid model. So it's work in an office environment and work at home, not work in one or the other. I do think in 2 years' time, people do have short memories. So I do think we'll be handshaking and hugging and kissing on cheeks again, and we'll forgot about the elbow bump. But yeah, so I think some things will change, but I do think this will have an impact. It will form a memory, I think. It's been a sort of 3 months of the year. We are going to see more spikes. We're already seeing the US closing down again. So I think there are some longer term issues. And I think the nervousness will be, if this has happened once, would it happen again? Is it going to be a once every 5 year occurrence, once every 10-year occurrence? And that'll be the issue, I think. But I think yes. So the answer is yes, things will change, but people will also go back to normal in some of their personal parts of their life. So what do you think?
One Russian politician 120 years ago, he said a phrase that Russia is a country where in 200 years nothing has changing, and in 10 years everything is changing. So
Yeah.
that's probably the case.
Yeah.
We live in this environment.
Good answer.
Yeah. So we from different parts of the world, we hear different things. I have a feeling that countries and real estate markets are becoming more and more isolated. So the process started with Brexit, obviously, and then then we see the more and more isolation in terms of political isolation, social isolation. But will it be reflected in real estate? What do you think? So will there be one global market in future, or there will be a number of local or clustered markets?
It's really interesting. I think it's, I'm not sure whether it's the IMF or the WF talking about this. This could potentially be the biggest challenge to globalization that we've seen. And I do think I was on a call this morning about logistics and security of supply chain, etc. And just the fact that component parts, manufacturing, everything is so dispersed around the world. I think there is a call now to have more elements either onshoring or certainly a lot closer than they are now. And I do think the way we're going as a society and politically, I do think there is more of a lean towards, and isolationism is a very big word for what, but it's a move in from globalization. So back to what's right for our own countries. And we saw it during the pandemic, that the countries across the EU took different approaches to one another, which is fine. We saw this week, America's approach is very different. Brazil's approach is very different. So I think every country has its own people to think about. They're the people that ultimately vote in their local politicians. So I do think we're going to have a slightly more restrictive market. And I do think we're going to have people and players that become real specialists in certain regions. And I've certainly started to hear more and more, and I've been hearing more and more about this for the last 10 years, I guess, about the opportunities in some of the more, not for them, but for us, the more undiscovered markets. So there are a lot of markets, as we talked about a few weeks ago, that really have a huge opportunity to make some real differences in terms of planning, in terms of a big scale changes that we haven't had the chance to do so far. So I think that'll be what's interesting. Emerging markets and then clusters of some of those more traditional economies.
Recently, I read an article in Financial Times talking about the shift from economy of efficiency towards economy of resilience. So basically, that says that corporates will be focusing not only on efficiency, on the revenues, only on EBITDA, but towards resilience, sustainability in more kind of wider terms. And also recently, there was information about Danone, who actually changed their bylaws, and now it's illegal entity. In France, there is a new legal entity type, which is something like mission-driven company. It's not corporation; it's mission-driven company, which has the priority for safety, for health, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you see this trend in real estate? Moving from efficiency, because we were always 20 years we're thinking about efficiency, density, how to use the space. Do you see this trend of this going somewhere in the background?
I do. That's a really good question. So when the situation arose, my nervousness was that a real desire to get the economy back on track again would make people almost forget about a lot of the ESG measures, a lot of the environmental, societal, all those sort of measures that we've made so much progress on over the last few years. But the good news is that we're hearing more and more when we talk to businesses now looking to invest, that this is a major consideration for them and their shareholders. And I think increasingly we are looking to countries that typically score very well on non-economic measures. So I look at the likes of Finland, that has a gross domestic happiness as part of its government charter, New Zealand, all these countries that you look at to be quite positive. And I think there's a lot more that can be done apart from just looking at the economy and the environment that we're in. So I do think we'll start to see a lot more around non-GDP measures, and there will see a lot more opportunity for companies to do what's right as well as what's profitable.
If we look at EMEA now, at EMEA region, do you think that some countries will will pass through this lockdown period in a better shape than others? Will there be winners or losers, or all the countries are pretty much in the same problem?
No, and fortunately or unfortunately, I think we will have some countries that were stronger going into the crisis, that I think will be stronger coming out of it. So we already had a number of countries across Europe in particular that had relatively weak debt to GDP ratios. And I think that is something we've seen increase again quite dramatically. And I think those are the countries that may be more challenged. So I think some of the Nordic markets remain quite strong. I think Germany always remains quite strong. But I do think some of the other countries may have more of a challenge. And I think a lot of it comes down also to what's going to happen with unemployment. So far, to some extent, we've been fairly immune. When you look at what's happened in America, where it's 6 million here, 7 million there, 25 million, just extraordinary numbers. But it's because of the way their system works, and the people that are furloughed come off the payroll and go straight onto unemployment. Whereas here, I think I was reading that between the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, 1/3 of all employees are being paid for by the government. They can't do that forever. So once that stops, I think a lot of the roles that those people have are in hospitality, are in tourism, are in retail, are in hotels, bars, restaurants. And a lot of those roles are typically done by younger people. So I do think we'll have a relatively large explosion in terms of youth unemployment in some of those markets. And we saw it last time. So we saw after the financial crisis, we saw youth unemployment in Spain running around 30, 35, 40%. And you've got to look at where job losses may come from. It's not going to be dissimilar this time. That's the challenge, I think. So I think countries that have gone into it with a fair amount of debt, they're the ones that are going to struggle coming out of it. The positives are that we have incredibly low interest rates. I mean, zero or zero or lower, which is extraordinary. I was doing some work the other day, and somebody was talking me through an economic model they've been using for like 10 years or so. And they had to get it redeveloped because it didn't work with negative interest rates. Mm-hmm. it only worked with positives. When it was developed 15 years ago, they were insane in negative interest rates. But now it's something that's, so it threw out all the calculations, so they had to get the guy back in to reprogram it. That's the positive side. So low inflation generally, low interest rates generally, which allows, hopefully, a flow of money to continue. And there doesn't seem to be any desire from governments to sort of stop the spending. And I do think that there is generally, it's really interesting, there's almost a what's the right word? There's almost a global view that we should come out of this. We want things to get better. And I think that's really interesting. That nobody wants it to carry on. We want the economy to get better. People have got a very open view as to how that will happen.
Weather?
My dog.
Yeah, very good.
There's something like a rainstorm here.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned debt, and it's kind of interesting. I do not clearly understand that, how it can be like low interest rates and basically increasing debt burden, because obviously all corporates, they will have to increase their debt, and governments will have to increase their debt. How sustainable is this situation?
It's hard, isn't it? Because companies spend a lot of time regearing and looking at lower and lower interest rates and changing the numbers that they have. And I think at the moment, the moment is that this is a big challenge and a big opportunity. The opportunity is, as we can raise relatively cheap debt, there are a lot of companies out there with billions on a balance sheet waiting to hoover up a lot of companies that may well struggle. So I think the next couple of years we'll see a big opportunity for M&A and just for takeovers, because some companies, they may have a great distribution hub, or they may have great office space. They just aren't going to be able to come out of this because of their portfolio and the balance that they have in different areas. So it's hard to know how long low interest rates are going to continue for. I mean, we've had them now for so many years. I'm just not sure how the world would cope if interest rates suddenly went up by 5 points, 10 points. How people will pay their mortgages. People are just used to living in an incredibly low interest world, and I don't know how we get away from that. That's a huge challenge. But it just doesn't give us much flexibility, so we can't drop them much further because they're already at 0%.
Yeah,
how low do you want them to go? So it's extraordinary where you get to a stage where you're paying people to look after your money, or banks are paying you to take out a loan with them. It's just it doesn't work in typical economic theory, I don't think.
Yeah. So we'll see probably very interesting times. So you are now running a huge research team that is covering, let's say, the whole EMEA region. So how are you doing that with all those people from different cultures? And I know that researchers are pretty much different from, let's say, brokers, because brokers everywhere, they're pretty much the same. But researchers in each culture, the researchers are different. So how you manage that?
They are, and I think one thing I was incredibly lucky about was probably the 6 months that we came up to COVID. So from the middle of last year to the end of last year, I managed to get out and meet quite a lot of the researchers. So I spent a fabulous time with you and Tatiana and Eugenia and Anya and all the team in Moscow. And I think having met somebody face to face, having shaken their hand, having had a coffee or a beer or a meal with them makes a huge difference. So fortunately, I have managed to meet a lot of the researchers, at least a lot of research heads. But it is very interesting because although we're a global company and we work as part of the EMEA business unit, each country has its own way of doing things, has its own targets, has its own profitability to ensure. So it's an interesting challenge trying to get all researchers to work together in the same way, because researchers naturally are very proud of what they've achieved, and they've achieved a huge amount working by themselves. And I think we just need to be sensitive, and I try and be sensitive, to not implementing something across the board where we already have a better solution in place. So you have an incredible database system set up in Russia. Why would I try and force something that was less modern, less valuable upon you? Just be insane, really. So I think the the very fortunate thing is that I sort of inherited a really, really good team. So it hasn't been as hard as it might have been. And I think I really enjoy speaking to and spending time with people. So I think I looked at my calendar before this. I think I probably spend about 50 hours a month on booked calls with people across EMEA. So I always want to know what's happening. I will always defend, support, help develop the team however I can. And I think the team like that, the fact that I will stand up for them. And there are sometimes things that might be deemed as the right thing to do at the time, but I do think we're just trying to get things so they're more consolidated. We have a broader view of what we're trying to achieve, and we're not just looking at one thing in particular, but we're looking at everything in the whole, really.
It's interesting. Companies like Cushman Wakefield, other consultants are always struggling with a paradox. When you have, for example, brokerage business, which is revenue, which brings in huge revenue, but again, this business is very volatile. So brokers, they change companies, they take their clients with them, and it's always struggle. However, for example, research and consultancy activities, they are building the platform which remains in the company. But however, it's always not enough attention to that part of the business: marketing, consultancy, research, and it's great that you are now leading that role. So, do you think at any point there will be a change, a kind of a paradigm shift, so people will start understanding that the importance of the platform?
This is just between you and I, isn't it? Nobody else will see this.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I think they really will. So I really think that and I don't know whether it's over the next 5, 10, 20 years, I think real estate will change dramatically. I think the money in real estate will be made in terms of having the ability to offer the right advice and consulting, more than I think it will be in terms of some of the traditional real estate revenue generation points we have at the moment. So I really think people will be paying for individuals' knowledge and approach versus the sort of more transactional side of things. Because I think in time, we already have it now, really. We have the technology that can address a lot of these issues. We had, broad discussions around blockchain, etc., tokenization a few years ago. And there's a view that I was on a call yesterday about global residential real estate, a view that maybe now this is the time for blockchain contracts and for much, much more adoption of technology. So I do think there will be a sea change. But I'm convinced that research and marketing in all its forms will remain. It will become more important. Mm-hmm. Because that's the one thing where you have to have it. You can't just talk about it. You've really got to have people that can understand what the situation is and explain it based on context, and therefore explain what it means for different companies and their businesses. So I think it's probably the best time to be in real estate right now, for me anyway, but for us. Yeah.
That's very good. Thank you very much for such an insightful and joyful talk. Thank you very much for joining. This was Andrew Phipps from rainy London in the rainstorm. So, dear colleagues, please follow our channel on YouTube, and you will see there additional IQ interviews with our other specialists, and also check out IQ Interview podcast in your podcasting software. Thank you very much, Andrew, and good luck in your work. Bye.
Thank you, Dennis. Take care.